Hey everyone, this is Katie from Northwest Martial Arts, and this is my friend and assistant to everything, Rose. And we're here today to talk a little bit about women's self-defense and some of the self-defense classes that we're running. I have been teaching jiu-jitsu for quite a few years, and I've been training jiu-jitsu for almost 10 years now. And I actually got my start in women's self-defense. And I'll go ahead and let Rose introduce herself.
I'm Rose. I've been training jiu-jitsu with Katie at Northwest Martial Arts for about 2 years, and I've also got started through the Women's Self-Defense program at the University of Oregon. I've been TAing for that program for about 2 years every term, and I'm getting trained as an instructor now.
Yeah, which is really awesome, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Women's self-defense is sort of our favorite thing to do.
Basically.
We also have Oscar and Lily here with us as our handy assistants. So we're going to talk today about women's self-defense and why it's so important, and there will be some sensitive content, so just want to give you that warning right now. So we're going to get into this conversation because we figured it was really important for us to talk about this class because I think sometimes people don't know what they're coming into, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So the first thing I wanted to ask Rose is, why should we be teaching women's self-defense instead of teaching men not to rape?
It's a really good question. If it was a perfect world, then we wouldn't be teaching the self-defense classes and we would just be able to prevent that. But the problem is that in our culture is kind of like a patriarchy, and there's like a really underlying like culture of like rape. And it's really difficult to address a cultural shift through classes that people have to come to and sign up for. It would be something that would take really long. It would be a long-term change. It would take a lot of time to create a cultural shift.
Right.
To make it so there would be less perpetrators and less sexual assault in our culture. In the meantime, we really want to address what we can do specifically with the victims to prevent assault as it's happening in the short term, because otherwise if we're just waiting for the long-term change, then a lot of people are going to suffer.
Right, absolutely, which is why you need to have two types of change, basically.
Yeah, so in the short-term change, we're looking at self-defense classes for women to learn how to help prevent and kind of disrupt assault and basically any kind of boundary crossing in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely, which I totally agree with. And I think that it's been really awesome to do, self-defense, like really talking to a lot of different women and seeing all their experiences and everything like that, and really being able to help them has been really awesome too.
It
right?
has been, yeah, there's been some really cool stories to get afterwards.
Yeah. So good question here of why do you think that women need both verbal and physical self-defense skills?
I think it's really important to practice boundary setting skills, like verbal skills, in addition to the physical skills we learn, which are kind of like what you'd think of obvious self-defense, is going to be learning how to use your body in a way to like hurt the other person to be able to get away from a dangerous situation, right?
Right. Just lots of punching.
Lots of punching. We're going to have kickboxing matches in the streets. In reality, most perpetrators are going to be men we know, and it can be really hard to go from caring about someone, like someone in our life, someone we might love, to going straight into like physical self-defense and, I don't know, gouging their eye out.
Right. Which we talk about frequently.
We do.
Yeah.
So there's a continuum of assault that we always talk about at the university classes that starts from irritating, moves to dangerous, and then finally comes to life-threatening. And obviously, like murder and femicide are going to be at the more life-threatening end. A lot of the stuff in the middle is really subjective to people's experience, and there's more irritating intrusions on this end. And we have to deal with these intrusions like every day of our lives.
Right.
All the time. Cat calls and unwanted comments, mansplaining.
Right. A lot of texting.
Yeah,
where are you? Where are you? Where are you?
Persistent communication.
Right.
Just a lot of stuff we don't want to deal with. And a lot of times perpetrators will actually use these less serious seeming intrusions in our life to kind of like escalate up to more serious intrusions, which is often how situations like domestic abuse or control emotional abuse can develop through like slowly controlling more and more things in your life.
Right.
So when we talk about self-defense, we want to be able to stop things early on the irritating end of the continuum of assault, because they're easier to stop there, and it's a lot less dangerous for us to stop them there.
Right. Yeah. Which I totally agree. And for many years, I was doing mostly just the physical portion of self-defense, which I thought for me was great, you know, but through starting all the verbal work, it feels like we've really been able to accomplish a lot more and really be able to help more than just people with saying, hey, here's how you punch someone, which is when you teach someone on a regular basis, you know? But because the situations aren't with just someone we don't know or with people we do know, learning how to set boundaries is really important.
Yeah. And even in situations I've been in where there's been someone coming towards me in a potentially dangerous manner, and I wanted to end the situation, I almost have never had to actually resort to violence and physical techniques. I've always been able to get them to leave me alone, to stop the situation, by changing my body language and my tone of voice, and usually yelling and getting loud.
Yeah, which is really awesome.
Yeah.
So, which brings me to my next question, actually. So I've heard that, you know, fighting back makes things worse. I think this is something that a lot of women hear, is that if you fight back, you're going to get hurt worse, and you shouldn't do that. So is that true?
No. You should fight back. Like, I'm not going to say always, because I don't like to say things in absolutes.
Right.
But in the vast, vast majority of situations, you want to fight back. My grandma actually just asked me about this, and she said about the same thing. If I was in a self-defense situation and I fought them back, wouldn't I make them angrier? No, probably not. They might get pissed off, but they would also probably bail. Most perpetrators are cowards. As soon as you start to resist in any way, like yelling, striking, any physical techniques, basically anything that's drawing attention to the situation, they have this scale in their head of kind of like the consequences of getting caught versus getting away with it. And as soon as you start to make a scene and start making noise and start fighting back, that starts to tip. They're like, if I don't get out of here, I'm going to get caught.
Right.
I'm going to get in trouble. And there's a statistic I always like to share, that any form of physical resistance will increase your chance in an assault situation of not being raped by 81%, which is a huge statistic.
That's a huge number.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And it's not like me just coming up and like giving you the best like punch ever, you know? It's like literally just any sort of struggle, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, as soon as you start struggling and striking back and showing that you're not going to go quietly, you're starting to flip the script. Perpetrators are looking for someone who's going to stay quiet and not fight back. That's kind of like is a gross term, but like their perfect victim. And as soon as you show that you're going to fight back, they're going to realize that you're not going to be a good target, and they're probably going to get caught, or they're going to get hurt, and they're going to bail.
Yeah, which is exactly what we want them to do once we get into it, if that happened to us, is we want to be able to effectively use boundary setting or using a physical skill to get away.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The goal here, I think a lot of people also think about self-defense as kind of like winning.
Right.
And the goal of self-defense is always to keep yourself safe.
Absolutely. And like one of the things I'm always saying in classes is about keeping our consciousness, right?
Yes.
You know, staying, you know, fully present in the moment to be able to defend yourself. And by practicing these movements and the physical skills that we do, the verbal skills that we also do with the physical skills, doing all those together and practicing, that means we're going to know, like, in the situation, like, how to deal with those things.
Yes,
yeah.
definitely. This kind of goes back into the last question a little bit, but a lot of times it can be really helpful if you're setting boundaries, starting small and getting bigger. As you watch the other person start to cross those boundaries, you start to realize the situation is becoming more serious, and it becomes easier to take some of those actions that may have been harder in a situation if it's someone you care about.
Right, right.
You can escalate your self-defense to match their behavior, knowing that they've already been crossing your boundaries.
Exactly. Like a lot of times, like I say in class a lot, is like once they've passed my boundary, then I know it's likely that they don't care about me. because I've already set my boundary and they said no.
Yeah.
So we have lots of different ways to deal with that. So speaking of all the things that, you know, about fighting back and can it make things worse and all the other things that we hear, if it's not true that fighting back can make things worse, what other myths do women hear about self-defense?
There's a lot of stuff sort of circulating on social media, particularly like Facebook, that I've seen about stories, success stories that women have carried out and they have successfully escaped an assault. But a lot of times the strategies they used were not super effective. And we call these passive verbal strategies that are usually the ones that get circulated. There are passive verbal strategies and active verbal strategies, and the passive, I'm just gonna list off the passive ones really quick, which are trying to reason with the attacker, kind of to appeal to their sense of reason and logic. You can do this by maybe asking them, think of your mother, think of your sister, think of your wife. The problem with reasoning with someone like this is that they are actually assaulting you, and at that point they are not being reasonable, they are not being logical, and they're unlikely to respond to that.
Right.
And also using that specific line of think of me as your mother or whatever female relation. You don't know what that person's relationship is with their family or with the woman in their life.
Right.
And generally, if they're going to already be perpetrating violence against women, then they're probably not going to have a great relationship with the other woman in their life.
Absolutely.
Another common tactic, well, not really a tactic, but a strategy I've seen is kind of acting unattractive or crazy or acting in a really weird manner. There's been plenty of stories about barking like a dog, pretending to have a seizure, pretending to have a heart attack, urinating on yourself. Just a lot of things that are really kind of throwing out a curveball, and they're
Just
also
strange. Just
very
being
strange. Yeah. And I can understand why people would think that might work if someone's like, oh, like I'm uncomfortable. But they can also really increase our perceived vulnerability.
Absolutely.
And in most cases, they're also based on trying to seem unattractive to the perpetrator, and sexual assault is not about sexual attraction, it is about power and control over the victim, which can obviously be a problem. As I just said, it increases our perceived vulnerability. This isn't really a strategy that I've seen passed around social media, but pleading or begging is also very, very unlikely to work. It's actually the least effective.
I think we see it in a lot of movies.
Yes, we see it all the time.
It's all over the movies. Like any movie I can think of, that has a scene of sorts like that is always someone begging and pleading, right?
Yes, and this appeals to the attacker's empathy.
Yeah.
Again, if they are assaulting you or attacking you, they're not being empathetic. They're probably not an empathetic person. And this also will increase your perceived vulnerability. So none of those strategies work super effectively. They will work on occasion. They will. I'm not going to say that they're never going to work. But they're a lot less effective than active verbal strategies you could use, like making a scene or yelling, naming the behavior. Which these are pretty straightforward. But
naming the behavior is one that I think is so important.
Yes.
I really think that one's very important.
Yeah, it's like as simple as if I put my hand on Katie's knee and she didn't want me to.
Yeah, and like get your hand off of my knee.
It's very clear. Like I put my hand on her knee. She's noticing it. She's calling it out. I can't argue. I don't have my hand on your knee.
Yeah.
It's there.
Get it off. Yeah, I think that's a really good call out about all the different strategies and things that people think. And I really, really think that the big part is that, really making the scene, making the noise, fighting back is so important. Like, that's really what's going to get someone's attention to get away, right?
Yeah, it does. And some of these other more passive behaviors, they're totally valid to use them They can be used really well to create time
Mhm.
and space,
Right.
and maybe just change the situation just a little bit so you can get the edge you need. But usually I would use them in combination with
Mhm.
another strategy.
And that's because, like we've talked about before, is that, it's not for me to always, or you, we know a lot, but I can't say exactly what is going to be right for someone in a situation.
No, never.
Right? So, really, whatever strategies you're trying to employ, they may be the right one for you at the time. I think you talk about that sometimes, that your
Yes.
self-defense is yours,
It
if you
is.
want to elaborate.
When we do these self-defense classes, we're kind of like, you have a toolbox and you have a certain
Mhm.
number of tools you can use, and we're
Mhm.
just giving you more,
Mm-hmm.
because we know that there's no one right way to respond to a self-defense situation. Everyone's going to be different.
Mm-hmm. Like, we're not there,
Yeah.
right? We
The
can't make
only-
a decision.
The only person who can make a totally informed decision about what's happening is the person in the situation.
Absolutely.
Anyone could go back and be like, oh, you should have done this, you should have done that.
Mm-hmm.
But they weren't there. They didn't
Exactly.
really know what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
So the person there is always the best one to make the decision with the tools they have available.
Mm-hmm. And I think another really good point that Rose brings up on a really common basis is that it is never the person's fault who it's happening to.
It is
Right.
always 100% the perpetrator's responsibility for the crime they choose to commit.
Absolutely.
It is never on the victim.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the victim's response is always the appropriate one at the time, because they're the only one that can make that determination.
Yes.
Completely.
I've been training for 2 years now, and I've learned quite a lot. And
Mhm.
no matter what, if I got into a dangerous situation, no matter how many skills I used or chose not to use, it would never be my fault.
Absolutely. Which I think is one of the most important things for us to say and
Yeah.
for people to hear, because a lot of people, I'll read stories on social media or whatever of people saying, oh, well, if I didn't do this, if I didn't do that, maybe it wouldn't have happened to me. But that's never a thought that I think that people need to have. It's
Mhm.
always on the perpetrator.
It is.
Totally.
It is.
So, going into this is the other question I wanted you to share with us is if you have, any personal success stories using self-defense that you want to tell us about.
Yeah, I have a pretty good one that happened, I don't know, probably about 6 months ago. I was in the Safeway parking lot with my friend, and we were walking into the store, and this guy was kind of talking aggressively to 2 or 3 women, and he kind of beelined off and walked towards my friend and I, and he was like, hey girls, can I ask you a question? And we were like, no, we're busy. And it would have been fine if it had just been left at that.
Right.
But he angrily, aggressively walks after us and yells, I just want to ask you a question. And so obviously I'm not at all okay with that. I'm like,
Right.
okay, we just crossed that nice boundary I set. It was
Mhm.
pretty clear. So I turn around and I yell back at him, we just said no, back off. And he does. He's like, oh. The yelling totally scared him away. He was looking for someone who's gonna let him get close, who
Right.
wasn't gonna yell, who was afraid or embarrassed to make a scene.
Mm.
And we knew that, so when we went inside, we went immediately to the manager and was like, hey, there's a guy in the parking lot harassing women. And when they finally came back out and kicked him out, he had been like banging on some woman's car window. So yeah, it's just a really good example of how you can use verbal skills and body language and kind of put those all together to kind of just drive someone away and stop a situation early.
Right. Like when we talk about boundary setting, like you're saying, like, no, I don't have time for your questions, whatever it is. Like you set that boundary, and I think that's a really important thing to note, that is a boundary.
Yes.
So when I'm saying to someone, no, I don't want to talk to you, or please get away from me, whatever it
Yes.
is, that's an actual boundary that is being set, and it's something that's measurable, right? So if I say, don't come anywhere near me, or, you put your hand on my knee and I say, Rose, take your hand off my knee, and when you don't do that, you're clearly crossing a boundary that I set. And I think that shift in thinking is so important of, you know, it's a boundary. I made it. It's not just a simple request and you may or may not comply. It's like, that's my boundary and decision of where I am and am not comfortable.
Yes.
So knowing where those boundaries are, where I stand with those boundaries, makes it easier for me to decide when someone's coming, you know, into my space. Is this something where my boundary is being crossed and now I need to react? You know, like that whole thing. It really helps to tie together what is boundary setting to me, especially with the simple, like, get your hand off my knee.
Yeah,
definitely. You know, so easy.
Yeah, I think one of the things we also talk about in women's self-defense is kind of like signs that you see in a possible perpetrator that might make them more dangerous, or maybe something that you notice that's like, it's like a danger cue for the future. You know that this is someone who you should maybe keep an eye on. And one of the biggest signs is ignoring ignoring those boundaries. Even if they're doing it with a smile on their face and they're joking, you have to keep the context kind of in your mind of they're just ignoring the boundaries I'm setting.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so important. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah.
Rose and I could talk probably all day long about this. We pretty much do talk about this all day long. I think this really gave a really good insight into why we're teaching both verbal and physical self-defense. And I really appreciate all the work that, you know, Rose does with me and all the information that she has really worked for, you know, with the University of Oregon and everything like that. It's been really eye-opening, especially I'm much older than Rose is. And so I didn't have those classes when I was at the university. So having a fresh look at what self-defense should be has been fantastic. And I really feel like it has opened up a whole new space for self-defense that I feel like women are really finding to be a useful thing that they have and know that they can do. It's not just, oh, I'm going to go learn how to punch someone, you know, and knock them out, you know. It's not, that's not all self-defense,
really
right?
Intimidating.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have to be really good at fighting.
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
You don't. No. It's literally that this verbal, physical self-defense is for everyone. And that's why we encourage everyone, regardless of, you know, your age, what you think your ability is, you know, anything like that. It doesn't matter, you know, if you identify as a woman, please come to our self-defense classes. We want to have you with us, and even if you feel like you're just there for the information, that's totally cool. We have people come all the time. And also it's, I have to say, it's really, really, really important for, you know, young girls to also have this information because it's true, it's relevant information. And facts are important, right?
Yeah.
So we always want to be giving the facts of like what is and isn't true, because if you're not sure what is or not true, how do we know how to react, right?
Yes.
So that's another thing that I really think is important. So we really hope to see you, you know, in the future at one of our self-defense classes. Check us out on Facebook, and you will see all kinds of events coming up this year. And thank you so much, Rose, for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
High five. Nailed it. Yeah.